more people will keep joining. But my name is Karen Tunin, and I am the chair-elect of the Adult Reading Roundtable. I'm also one of the program organizers. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Adult Reading Roundtable is a organization of Chicagoland librarians and library staff that are dedicated to helping others develop readers' advisory skills and to promote reading for pleasure in libraries. We have partnered with Rails to help bring you this event live, and there will also be a recording. So if you or any of your colleagues want to watch it in the future, we will be able to share that link with you. We have the title of Murder They Wrote, which we will be bringing some crime writers of color to you from the Crime Writers of Color organization. We're going to have about 45 minutes for the panelists to talk, followed by some questions. There'll then be a pause and the librarians are going to take over, and we'll provide some additional book talks, and then we'll discuss some collection issues, and we'll follow up with questions at the end. I am now going to turn it over to Cari.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cari Dubiel, and I am a librarian in a shoebox in Cleveland, Ohio, seems like. But I just wanted to thank my colleagues and friends from Crime Writers of Color for being here today. I'm so excited to talk with you, and I'm so excited for all of you to hear about their books because they are so good. So without further ado, let's go on so that we can gush about these great works. I'm going to start with Kellye. Kellye Garrett is the author of the acclaimed Detective by Day lightweight mysteries. The first Hollywood Homicide won the Anthony, Agatha, Lefty, and Ippy for Best First Novel. The second, Hollywood Ending, was featured on the Today Show's Best Summer Reads of 2019 and was nominated for both Anthony and Lefty awards. Her next novel, Leica Sister, which I just got the advanced reading copy for, I'm so excited, will be released by Mulholland Books in March 2022. Leica Sister is a Megan Miranda-esque own voices suspense novel in which no one bats an eye when a disgraced reality TV star is found dead in the Bronx, except her estranged half-sister, whose refusal to believe the official story leads her on an increasingly dangerous search for the truth. Kellye serves on Sisters in Crime's National Board and is a co-founder of Crime Writers of Color. Learn more at kellyegarrett.com. There's Kellye. Mia P. Manansala is a writer and certified book coach from Chicago who loves books, baking, and badass women. She uses humor and murder to explore aspects of the Filipino diaspora, queerness, and her millennial love for pop culture. Her debut novel, Arsenic and Adobo, came out May 4th, 2021 with Berkeley Penguin Random House. Next up is Homicide and Halo Halo. I hope I'm saying that right. A lover of all things geeky, Mia spends her days procrastinating, playing JRPGs and dating sims, reading cozy mysteries and diverse romance, and cuddling her dogs Gumiho, Max Power, and Bailey Banks, RIP. Bonus points if you get all the references, which I don't, sorry Mia, but you'll have to explain them to me sometime. Wanda M Morris. As a corporate attorney, Wanda M Morris has worked in the legal departments of some of America's top Fortune 100 companies. She is an accomplished presenter and leader. Wanda previously served as president of the Georgia chapter of the Association of Corporate Counsel, in which she established a signature female empowerment program known as the Women's Initiative. She is an alumna of the Yale Writers Workshop and Robert McKee's Story Seminar. She is a member of Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America, and Crime Writers of Color. She is married, the mother of 3, and lives in Atlanta, Georgia. All Her Little Secrets is her debut novel. And last but not least, Alex Segura is an acclaimed award-winning writer of novels, comic books, short stories, and podcasts. He is the author of Star Wars Poe Dameron, Freefall, the Pete Fernandez mystery series, including the Anthony Award nominated crime novels, Dangerous Ends, Blackout, and Miami Midnight, and the upcoming Secret Identity from Flatiron Books. His short story Red Zone won the 2020 Anthony Award for Best Short Story, and his border noir short story 90 Miles will be included in the Best American Mystery and Suspense Stories of 2020. He has also written a number of comic books, most notably the superhero noir, The Black Ghost, the YA music series, The Archies, and the Archie Meets collection of crossovers featuring real-life cameos from the Ramones, the B-52s, and more. He is also the co-creator and co-writer of the Lethal Lit Crime YA podcast from iHeartRadio, which was named one of the best podcasts of 2018 by the New York Times. A Miami native, he lives in New York with his wife and children. So there you have our 4 panelists, yay! And I'm so glad to have you all here with us today. So I have prepared a few questions and we'll just kind of jump around. But I wanted to ask each of you first, because as a writer myself, I love to hear the origin story. How did you become a writer? What got you started, and specifically what led you to crime fiction? So I'll just go in alphabetical order to start, and then we'll mix it up as we go. So we'll start with Kellye.
I guess I've always just loved books, and I've always wanted to be a writer since I was like 5 years old. And my mother was she still is a big reader. And so one of the great things she did for me, she would just like let me read any book I wanted to read on her shelf. So when I was younger, obviously I had my own books, like, I don't know, like Sweet Valley High, Sweet Valley Twins, Encyclopedia Brown. But when I was about like 11, I discovered cozies, like Joan Hess and Jane Jeffrey. And I kind of just fell in love with them. When I was 13, I discovered Jackie Collins, but don't tell anybody. And so I just kind of fell in love with them. And that's how I kind of first fell in love with them. And then I discovered people like Walter Mosley and Sue Grafton and like these PI novels, Valerie Wilson Wesley. And I love the idea of, I think because I'm so nosy of like, investigating, and also the fact that it's always usually has a very satisfying ending where the bad guy gets caught. So that's where my superhero origin story started.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, so Mia next. I guess I'm going by last name, alphabetical order.
Okay. Hey everyone. I mean, kind of similar to Kellye. Like I was a reader from a very young age, and my mom was also the one who kind of encouraged me. She used to work at Walden Books. R.I.P. to that. She's also currently works at. She's a page at the Herald Washington. I'm also a library worker at the Forest Park Public Library. So hello, fellow Rails members. But even though mystery has always been one of my favorite genres, I particularly got into Encyclopedia Brown, and then later my mom got me into Mary Higgins Clark, and she's also the one who got me into cozies. I used to think that I was going to be a kidlit author. Like, I work in youth services, but I never tried writing seriously until a few years ago, and I took my very first creative writing class, and it happened to be a one-day mystery writing workshop taught by Lori Rader Day. And in that class, I came up with the idea for my very first finished novel. Not my debut novel. There's some twists and turns on this path, but my very first finished novel, I got the idea in her class, and she was so amazingly supportive. She read what I had started, and she was like, I think you're a mystery writer. Like, have you ever, done anything before? I'm like, no, this is my first class. And she let me know about, at the time she was the president of Mystery Writers of America Midwest. She was also a member of Sisters in Crime. So she told me about all these writing organizations that are there to support like up and coming writers. And that's just kind of where it all began. It led me to Kellye. It led me to all different kinds of things.
That's awesome. And that's where I first met you, was at Sisters in Crime booth in Chicago.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Wanda, how about you next?
So my path was a little different. I've always loved to read, like the others have said on the panel. But I never set out from like, age 10 to be a writer, because I was the youngest of 7 kids. And so our resources were really, really scarce. So I was encouraged to get a real job, so to speak. Right? Writing isn't a real job. But so I went off and became a lawyer, but I never lost my love for words and reading and writing. And so I would squirrel away and, journal and like these weird little short stories and things like that that I never told anybody about. And then, like Mia said, I had, kind of this twist and turning path, and finally committed to doing this a few years ago. And so that's how I came to write. But I think I've always been writing. I just never told anybody. Like, in fact, I didn't tell a lot of people in my family I'd written a book until the pre-order link went live. So
That's really, I could never keep that secret. I'm like the open book walking around my work. Oh my gosh, I got another rejection. That's me. But how about Alex?
Yeah, my origin story. I was always a reader. I was really into comic books. I probably read the Godfather novel way too early. I think I was 8 or 9, and I got really into true crime and Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. But I always wanted to make my own stories, so I'd like draw my own comic books and kind of come up with my own versions of stories with those characters. I remember handwriting this really long Star Trek novel when I was in 6th grade, which it was like 100 pages handwritten, which I'm proud of now, but at the moment I think didn't really do me any favors in terms of popularity in middle school. But yeah, in terms of crime fiction, I always liked true crime, and I was into the classics, but I got into modern PI fiction, I guess in my late 20s when I got my first job in Manhattan in comics. When I think when one of my passions became my day job, I had to find another passion. And then I got really into PI novels that were really strong in voice and setting. And I just took a stab at doing my own. I really wanted to see one where there was a Cuban American protagonist that reflected the Miami I knew, that wasn't like the Miami Vice version where it was like guys in suits and just on the beach, like drinking daiquiris. And that's where Pete showed up, and that's what got me started.
That's awesome. So I think I'll do the next like general question, and then I'll start asking you all some individual questions, because I know that our librarians are probably getting excited to hear about your books and your writing. So since a couple of you mentioned it, the twists and turns along the path, just tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how you got there, and maybe some surprises you didn't expect. So how about I'll go backwards this time. We'll start with Alex.
With some surprises. I guess the biggest thing I learned is that there's no tried and true path. It's not like dominoes that you need one to fall first for the rest to happen. I got Silent City, my first novel, got rejected by every publisher under the sun and got passed on by every agent that existed in the writer's marketplace. And I kept going. I realized that I wanted it to happen and I wanted it to exist, and I knew it was good. I can say that now. I think at the time I just had this like primal desire to just have it be out there and exist. And I found a really tiny like boutique publisher in New York that did poetry and did like literary stuff. And I said, and they said they'd put it out, and they put it out, and I just hustled like crazy. I started promoting the book like crazy. I would bring boxes of books to bookstores and sell them on consignment and do events. And I called in every favor I had. And then I got my agent. My eventual agent noticed, and at that point it was my second agent. So I had an agent. He didn't really do much for me. I hustled. I made Silent City happen on my own. Then I got an agent who noticed the hustle that made Silent City happen. And then she was able to help me kind of get my first like real traditional publishing deal with Polis. But I guess my biggest surprise was that, I guess the biggest lesson I've learned is, celebrate the victories, but also like don't let the defeats bring you down too low, because you have to kind of keep level. Publishing is an up and down thing, and rejection is really part of it. Like you just have to brace for it. Like you're never going to get 100%. You're never going to get exactly what you want. And if you just power through it and have faith in your work. And that's hard. It's hard to have faith in your work when everyone's telling you it doesn't fit, or it's not right, or the timing isn't right, or maybe try again. But I think that's got to come from within first. I didn't mean for that to get all like metaphysical, but it's just
that actually
my big
helps
lesson.
me
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you're a reader, so that was
Yeah.
my big thing. Like I was a reader, and I knew what I liked, and I knew what was good, and I liked my book, and I wanted it to exist. So manifest your book, basically.
How about Wanda? How did you keep it from
So-
your family?
Yeah. So my path was like 13 years in the making to this November when my book publishes. And that's because I wrote the very first draft of All Our Little Secrets way back when. And then, like I told you, I wasn't telling anybody. I hadn't even told my own husband at first that I had written this book. But I put it away because I kept reading it. And then I kept thinking, nobody is going to want to read a story about a 40-ish Black woman who works with these really awful people who do really awful things. And, it's kind of like what Alex said, you have to believe in your work. And I think at the time I was a newbie writer. I didn't believe that, I had a talent for doing this. And then about 7 or 8 years later, I went back to it because I had a health scare. And I decided, life's short and I'm going to do what I want to do and the things that actually give me joy. And writing always has. So I picked the manuscript up again and it was god awful, but that was okay because at least I had some place I could start. I knew that I could make it better. And so I started to, hone my craft. I took classes and, I tried to find a community of, like-minded writers. And along the way, I did Pitch Wars, which is an online mentoring program. And, Wonder of Wonders, I got in and met this lovely author named Wendy Hurd. And, she helped me along. And I thought for sure, because part of the Pitch Wars program is that at the end of the 3-month mentoring program, you do an agent showcase. And so agents can, read your first page of your manuscript and decide they want to see, the rest of the book. And I did that and I got like tons of interest in all these agents. And I was like, all right, I'm getting an agent. And I sent the manuscript out to everybody who requested it and everybody said no. And I was like, oh, and this was all after I had queried it for a couple of years before that. So I was just kind of like, but I attended a conference in New York City, Thriller Fest, and I participated in their pitching session. And I met my agent there. And, it's interesting, when somebody, after you've had all this rejection and somebody looks at your work and says, you know what, I really like this. There's a good story here. And I was just like, really? You almost don't believe it. You're like, I've heard no so many times before. But that was kind of how I got my agent. 9 months, we worked on notes, but like 9 months intervened because, I met her in 2019 and then the beginning of 2020, the world shut down. I kind of stopped writing, so I kind of shut down a little bit too. And after we kind of came up for air, then we went out on submission. So it's kind of a long and winding road, but I don't regret any of it, even though I went through some really, really vicious rejection, because some people aren't nice when they reject. I mean, like really not nice. But all of it was something there for me to grow on and learn from. And so I tried to use that, the good and the bad.
That's a great story. Mia, how about you?
Kind of similar. So as I said, so Arsenic and Adobo is actually the second book that I've finished and created. I'm also on my second agent. So like my path, I started out like, oddly enough, like smooth sailing, like, wow, I didn't think it. So, like I said, like I met Lori, I started I started my book. I got a scholarship from MWA. I won the Malice Domestic grant for like unpublished writers. And that's how I met Kellye. I gave a speech at the conference, an acceptance speech, and then I guess she liked what she heard, so she introduced herself to me, and she was just like, "Oh, hey, I don't know if your manuscript is finished yet, because the grant, you don't have to have a finished manuscript." She was like, "But I'm a mentor in this organization called Pitch Wars," which Wanda just talked about, and she's like, "So once you finish this, I would love for you to submit." Right. So we kind of like exchanged social, like candles, and started talking, and I had been working on this book for a while now, and I finally had like a deadline. I was like, oh, well, if I want to be part of this mentorship program, I have to complete it. So I finally had that impetus to push to the end. And so I finished, I applied, Kellye luckily chose me, and we did all the revisions. And, I went through the agent showcase, I got multiple agent offers, and it felt like bam, 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 all these things were lining up. And then a year and a half of rejections from editors. A year and a half. 3 times I got really close. I got to the stage we call acquisitions, which is basically, a lot of people don't really know how many steps, how many yeses you need before you can get there. You got to finish the thing, you got to find an agent, you got to find an editor, and then that editor has to get a yes from basically like the sales and marketing team. And this last step is where all those no's kept happening. As Wanda said, some people can be really harsh in their rejections. One person like straight up told my editor that I had no audience because my first book wasn't a cozy, but it was traditional mystery. It was a humorous traditional mystery. She said, she has no audience. Traditional mystery is for older white women. Nobody's going to buy this book. Like in my, in the email, like it's written out there. And I was just like, oh, okay. So a year and a half, this is happening. I'm working on the next thing because I need to keep my, because that's all you can do, right? You can't just sit around waiting for good news. You got to move on to the next thing. So I started on the book that would eventually become Arsenic and Adobo. And again, it started off great. The opening chapters won the Eleanor Taylor Bland Award. Some things were going on. Some things happened in my personal life. There was a bereavement that kind of shut me down for a little bit, but I finally pushed through. I finished it, and I sent it to my then agent, and she didn't like it. She told me, she was very honest, and she was like, I loved your first book, which I couldn't sell. This book is definitely more marketable. I can see how you've improved, but I don't love it. And you should probably find someone who does. So like after all of that work, we split up, and I had to start querying again. But like luckily by this point, I had become a better writer thanks to Kellye, giving me all those tools during the mentorship program, and just, reading more and learning more about the industry. So when it was time for me to query again, luckily I was able to find a new agent fairly quickly. So I was able to sign with my new agent within 2 weeks. And then once we went on submission, she sold my debut at auction in 2 weeks. So it's a lot of, I always say it's like, it looks almost like, like an overnight success, because it's like, oh, look at how fast she sold, but it's just like, but there was just so much before that people don't see. So.
I love that story too. I love all these stories. Kellye, why don't you tell us yours?
I feel like I'm just gonna do the highlights. So I am like I said, I'm a huge cozy reader. And so I like had this idea for this book, 2011, for like what I thought was cozy. I thought like, oh, obviously like there are no Black books with Black, like cozies with Black women. So obviously no one's writing them, which is not the truth at all. It's just that publishing can be racist and is not publishing them. So I finished my what would be Hollywood Homicide in 2014. I got into Pitch Wars, which you guys can see a pattern here, in 2014, where I had a mentor, Sarah Henning, and we did some revisions on the book. And in the agent showcase, I was lucky where I think I only got 2 requests, but Pitch Wars was different back then. But one of them was Michelle Richter from Fuse Literary, and she actually offered me rep at a bar at Crime Bake. And so I was like, oh yeah, like I think the same thing, like, oh, I finally made it. And then we went on submission, and this was 2015. Went on submission, and we got rejected by every publisher. And unlike Mia, like no one ever says like, oh, like they didn't tell me that there's no audience. And so I was like, oh, it's too similar to something we already have, which was not, because they don't have any Black books, and things like that. And so after a year after rejections, finally Terry Bischoff at Midnight Ink took a chance on it. And I always tell the story not to sound conceited, but just to kind of share, because I think a lot of times when people say like, oh, a person of color says I couldn't get published because of racism, they go, oh, well, no, it's just because your book wasn't good enough. So by the time Terry got my book, she gave very few edits. So the book that won the Anthony and the Agatha and the Lefty and the Ippy and got 2-star reviews from Publishers Weekly and Library Journal, that was the same book that got rejected by every editor. And so I was kind of like this critical success. Second book came out, and it was great. And I was working on the third book, and 3 days before my birthday, I got an email saying that my publisher, Midnight Egg, was abruptly closing. We had no clue it was happening. I don't even think Terry knew. And so it was like I had this book that was like semi-finished as a file on my computer. I had the first 2 books, and I was just kind of like, what am I going to do now? You know, and I think that's the thing too with publishing. People think once you get published, it's smooth sailing, and it's not. And so I decided to kind of pivot, because I liked doing the series, but there were some things I didn't like about a series. So I decided to kind of pivot to a more like a Megan Miranda-esque kind of still mystery, but also domestic suspense genre, which I think also needs a bit more diversity, which is why I'm so glad like people like Wanda are getting published. And so it's funny because with the first book, it took 1.5 years to sell. With the second one, we sold it in 5 days at a preempt. It was about to go to auction with like 5+ publishers. So that was a completely different experience. I was not as excited as I thought it would be. And so Leica Sister is coming out March 8th, 2022 with Mulholland Books. So I'm sure I'll still have ups and downs after this, but I'm just enjoying this moment.
Yes, as you should. So why don't I ask you all about these different books, because so all of you have books coming out soon. Wanda, yours comes out in November, right? And then
Yep.
the
I
rest
love
of you, it's all 2022 stuff. So I have in my hot little hands, I have already read all her little secrets, and I have all of I don't have yours, Mia, but I have Alex's and I have Kellye's on my Kindle, so I'm really excited. So Mia, I actually want to ask you first about, because you mentioned when you were talking about how the editor said that your book didn't have an audience.
Mm-hmm.
I personally felt that it was one of the more relatable cozies, maybe because I am a millennial and there may be some millennial librarians in this audience. Do you see the cozy changing as more of us have more time to read, maybe, or, you know, become more ensconced in this genre, I guess?
Definitely. I mean, I really hope so. And so another thing I want to point out is that not necessarily too many people think about is that timing can often play a key, right? So like my first book, as I said, it wasn't a cozy, but it was humorous traditional mystery. And it was a queer Filipino American solving a murder mystery at a comic book convention, right? Very heavily within like that millennial sphere. And they were just saying like, who do we market this to? Who is this for? Were some of the questions they said. And I'm just like, well, I mean, there's so many different, but you know, this was like what, 2017, 2018. And you know, and back then they didn't see younger, you know, like we're all still adults, but like younger than the usual, getting into those kinds of mysteries. They didn't feel that people would like those kinds. And now, you know, 3 years later, my publisher Berkeley realizes that there is a dearth because of publishing. So they recently started a line of cozies, specifically diverse millennial cozies. So when I started talking to my one of my editors, I have 2 editors, but when I talked to the more senior editor, Michelle Vega, she was really excited about this. She's like, your book is the reason we started like these kind of, like, you know, like mine wasn't the first, but she's like, when you know, my agent sent that book, she was like, this is it. This is exactly who we're looking for. Because some of the other, like, so like Abby Colette's, you know, the ice cream parlor series is part of that line. Jennifer J. Chow with her Sassy Cat, Olivia Black with her killer content, the Brooklyn Murder series. All of those are part of that line, which if you've picked them up, you've noticed it's slightly younger protagonists, a different kind of feel. But at the same time, and they're honest, none of them are millennials, you know, and it's like I was the person right at the age range writing for my age range from a, so like there was just a lot of like circumstances that aligned perfectly, where like if I had gone out with this exact same book 3 years ago in 2018, maybe not, maybe a small publisher and I'd be getting like, you know, small beans, but now a big 5 publisher was very willing to go to auction for this book because they saw the potential for opening up the readership. So yeah, I think some exciting things will be happening. Still slowly. Publishing is very, very slow, but it's going in the direction that we're hoping for.
That's awesome. I love that. And although you all authors will not be here during the second part of our presentation, we have a ton of books that we're going to book talk, and several of the ones you mentioned, Mia, are on there. And I will ask all of you before we, you know, get done with our part of talking, I'll ask you for some of your book recommendations because I love book recommendations, even though I really need to just sit down with my Kindle and read the ones that are on my Kindle. So I'm going to jump over to Alex. I wanted to ask you about this new book because I just started reading it and I'm just absolutely in love with it. It is such a cool book. It is a female protagonist and who is facing up against sexism in comics and a setting in the 70s. So how did you move from Pete Fernandez to this? What was kind of your goal in writing this story?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I liked about the Pete novels was how I could change the setting, and my favorite novels have my favorite crime novels have unique settings that teach you about a world that maybe you're not super familiar with. You know, Megan Abbott does it really well. Elizabeth Little did it well with Pretty as a Picture. You know, like they transport you into another world and you kind of learn about this world and what it is. And I thought comic books was really ripe for that. And that's my day job. And I do a lot of work in comics. And the 70s in particular were a low point for the industry. You know, now comics are everywhere. They're on TV, they're in the movie theater. You can't really escape comics. And it's gotten to the point where a lot of people don't even know the source material. They just know like Avengers is a great movie or what have you. So I wanted to show that moment. I have a real fondness for New York in the 70s before it became kind of New York, less safe, a little bit, you know, more like the Deuce and a little bit menacing and with some bite to it. And I'd already written so many Miami novels, and I figured that now I was ready to write a New York crime novel. But I wanted to show just how hard it was at that time to break into comics and how doubly hard it would be for a woman. But I also wanted to still connect it to Miami. So Carmen Valdez is a Cuban-American woman who comes to New York from Miami, and she has a passion for comics and she wants to work in comics, but she has to go through all these hurdles just to be heard. And even then her boss says, you know, I can't, I have a line out the door of people that want to write comics and you're my secretary and it's just not going to work. So she has to then find this alternate path. And I think that speaks to a lot of challenges not only women but people of color face when trying to break into industries that they're passionate about. And I also wanted to blend the two mediums. I love comics, I love graphic storytelling, and so there are actual comic book pages in the novel. So you're reading the prose and you hop into the comic that is created in the novel. And it's I hope it lands. It was tricky to do and to kind of juggle all that stuff, but it was a blending of all my passions together, and it's I was happy with it. So
that's cool. I can't wait to get my hands on the print version. I'm sure
I hope you have the version that has the artwork in it.
Yeah, I don't. I
Okay.
have just the straight up, you know, black and white Kindle version. So I'll have to see if I can get my hands on the printed, because that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Kellye, let's pop over to you. I wanted to ask you about your TV writing background, and maybe you could tell our audience about what you did on Cold Case and how that influenced your books.
So sure. So before I like actually got brave enough to write a book, I worked in television. So I worked on a TV show called Cold Case, which was on CBS like 10 plus years ago. It was a procedural, like kind of like a Law and Order, which is like where there was a cop solving a mystery every week. And so the thing about TV is you only get like, technically they say it's 60 minutes, but really it's probably like 42 when you factor in the commercials, because you still have to factor in commercials even if people don't watch them. And so I learned so many things. Like I learned, like my books are very plot heavy and they're always moving. Like every scene is not like, there's no like, la, 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 look at the flowers, you know? And so that's because in TV, you don't have the time to do so. Every scene has to move the story forward. So I like to think that every scene in my book has either like it introduces a character, or it, you know, it plants something, or it has a reveal, something like that. And then the other thing I learned from TV writing is that, again, with commercials, they have what they call act outs, where right before the commercial break, they always want to end it on a climax. So you'll basically sit through the commercials of like, oh, like you're already going to buy Colgate, but you're going to still sit through the Colgate commercials, see what happens next. And so I do that. I do what I call my chapter outs, where I try to end every chapter on like a really exciting, even if it's like the middle of a scene moment, just so people are like, oh, I just want to stay up and read like one more chapter. Because to me, like that's the ultimate of a good book, right? When you just want to like, you have to just stay up and read like just one more chapter. So those are the things that I kind of learned from TV. I don't miss it. You know, I've been gone for about 10 years. I don't miss it, but I definitely enjoyed the experience that I had writing for Cold Case so many years ago. And actually, if you're on HBO Max, it's season 5. It's called Family 8108. It's about the Japanese internment camps, and that was the episode that I co-wrote, so you can check that out. I still get checks for it, which is nice too.
That's so cool. I do have HBO Max. My husband works for the cable company.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So since we are running short on time, Wanda, I'm going to ask you your question, and then I'm going to ask you all for your book recommendations. So Wanda, I want to ask you the question about all of the different plot threads in your book. There was a strong emotional through line with our main character, Elise. She was just so well developed, but then there were also all these crazy things going on around her in the company where she worked. So I just want to know, like, how did you create that plot? Did you start with the emotional, I don't want to ruin anything for the readers, but the you know, the event that drives Elise, or did you start with the plot and then go to character from there?
Gosh, where does it come from? I guess like part of my vivid imagination and part of my living some of that stuff. I mean, it was when I set out to write the book, I knew that I wanted a protagonist that was not only smart and like sophisticated and unafraid to go up against all these bad guys, but I wanted somebody who was fragile in her own way, that she had the sense of being broken too. And that always kind of hovered around her, and it manifested in, you know, the way she saw the world and the way, you know, she, you know, handled certain issues. Like, I don't think it's a spoiler, but, you know, kind of the opening scene when she goes to the executive suite for a meeting with her boss, you know, I mean, who does that kind of stuff? It has to be somebody who really has something deeply ingrained. And so that was the part of the story that for me, I focused on, because I wanted to write a story that was also about kind of this love and loss. And I wanted to play with themes of who is family, you know, who do we call family? Because, you know, the company is, you know, very resolute that all its employees are part of a family. And, you know, who are the people that we call family, our work family, our blood family, the people that aren't related to us by blood, but still love us as if they were family. And so I think, you know, I knew those were the things I wanted to play with. There are 2 scenes that remain a constant from that very, very first time I wrote the book way back, 13 years ago. And it was the opening scene where she goes to the executive suite, and then another really pivotal scene in the middle of the book. And those two scenes never changed throughout all the revisions and all the edits and all the notes, because those were the two scenes that played with that theme of who is family and how is this woman, fragile. So that's kind of weird.
That's interesting. I'll definitely have to think about that. Any one of your books would be, all four of you would be great for a book club. And I just love hearing the answers to those questions that are cogitating while I'm reading. So before I ask you all to give your book recommendations, why don't we go over to Kellye, and Kelly's going to talk a little bit about what Crime Writers of Color is, and maybe when each of you talk about your book recommendations, you could also tell us maybe how you got involved in the organization. If we have enough time, we've got about 5 minutes till questions.
Sure. So Crime Writers of Color is a group of about over 300 writers of color who all do crime fiction. And it was co-founded by myself, an award-winning author named Gigi Pondian, and Walter Mosley, who I think everyone knows who Walter Mosley is. And so for us, I kind of, like Gigi and I were surprised that there wasn't a group already when I came out in like 2016, 2017. And so we were about to go and work on a group together. And then I think Naomi Hirohara told me, she's like, oh, Walter Mosley wants to start a group. And I'm like, that's great, but like, when will I ever meet Walter Mosley? Like, we don't hang out like in the same circles. And then sure enough, about 2 weeks later, I got invited to do a panel with him. And so as soon as I saw him, I was like, I wanted to start a group as well. And to his credit, he like took my phone number down. He actually called me. We had a whole conversation. And so we started the group. It's not an official organization like a Sisters in Crime. It's just more of a very informal group. Everyone here, we have a lot of people who volunteer. So we have a website, which is crimewritersofcolor.com, which I would think everyone should go to, because we have an amazing book site that Marla Bradeen created for us. We have a speakers directory that Mia created for us. We have an events page that Wanda created for us. And then Alex and Mia are also conference liaisons. And so we talk a lot with conferences like BoucherCon and any kind of conference. If you guys have conferences, you can definitely contact us. We can help you try to figure out how to make the programming more diverse, because our attitude is that you should not have diversity panels, you should have diverse panels. And we will be having library liaisons. We have 2 people working on it. So hopefully they can reach out to all of you guys and figure out how you guys can learn more about our authors' books. And also, how we can kind of all work together and do events and things like that. So I'm excited for the work. Oh, should I just give my my suggestion? Because it's actually Gigi's book.
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. She has a new one coming out, right?
Yes. So it's funny because Gigi, Alex, and I all have our next books coming out in March of 2022. So I think she and Alex are like around like March 22nd or something. And so Gigi is like, she's won awards like an Agatha and an Anthony, because she is the queen of writing lockroom mysteries, which I guess are impossible crimes. And so she is doing it's called Under Lock and Skeleton Key. It's coming out with St. Martin's. And it's about this woman who's a disgraced magician. And she's owns voices. So it's the same background as Gigi, who's mixed Indian and white, I think she is. And she comes home and her family has like this really cool business where they kind of create secret rooms for people's houses. And they go to someone's house and they find a body in a wall. And even though the wall is like really old, the body is someone that she knows. So it's kind of like, how did this person get into this really old wall? And it's just like, Gigi's just so amazing with kind of creating that world and creating these amazing characters. And if you're already a fan of her Jaya Jones books, you're gonna like see some characters in there that you already know and recognize. So it's just really cool to see like how they're all in like the same Gigi Pondian world.
I just typed it into the chat. Yeah, I'm excited. She's such a good writer.
Yeah, it's on Edelweiss and I think NetGalley.
Yeah, I've got it. Might be a little bit of a advanced reader copy hoarder, but I do read them and I read a lot. So,
oh, nice.
And I like to write reviews. Who wants to go next?
Okay, I'll go next. So can I just like thank Kellye Garrett first and foremost, because when I was way back when, this was before Pitchforks and all this other stuff, and I was writing and querying and getting all these rejections and doing it all by myself, I read about Kellye in Writer's Digest, and I picked up her book, and I was like, oh my God, there's another Black woman who writes mysteries, because you write in the solitude and you think you're all alone. And so I snuck up into her DMs and I was like, hey, I really like your writing, and I'm writing a mystery too, and I think you're really cool. And she was so gracious and she was so lovely. And she said, oh my gosh, you need to be in this group that, we're forming. And I think it was a Facebook group way back then. And she's like, oh no, we've got this group of people. And she took me under her wing, and I'm 1,000 thank yous, Kellye. You're so sweet. And so
I'm into Alex's DM, so I totally understand sticking to someone's DMs.
all are welcome.
So the book I'm reading now is not a mystery, but it's a really, really good book. It's called Revival Season by Monica West. And she's a debut author. She's in my 2021 debut author. And she's just a fantastic writer. And it is about a Black Baptist preacher who believes that he can heal people. But as the story progresses, we learn that in fact he doesn't have that gift, but his daughter, who the story is told through her eyes, in fact has the gift of healing, and how that affects her and this whole community of faith believers, because in that community, women are not held up in a very positive light or believed to have had that gift. So it's a really, really good book. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you. That's good, because we have tons and tons of crime fiction, so something a little different is welcome. Mia, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next. So, Alex didn't steal mine. So I want to shout out two books in particular. So one is Dead Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. She's also a debut novelist. Her book takes place in 1920s Harlem. It's not a cozy. I like multiple times we've said, like, because it has the typical Berkeley Illustrated cover, a lot of people go into it and are upset. I'm like, the back cover blurb says it's a serial killer killing young Black girls. I don't know why you went into it thinking it'd be a cozy, but I just want to give that, like, just in case you're like, oh, a cozy author. But it is, she does a wonderful job with the setting. Like, you really, like, the clothing, like the dance scenes, and you just really feel part of it, which I think it's a character in itself. So I thought that was an excellent job. I particularly have been looking for more inclusive historical fiction, which has been kind of difficult. So definitely would recommend that. Also, there's another soon-to-be debut member of Crime Writers of Color, Raquel Reyes. I think she writes under Raquel V. Reyes, Mango Mambo Murder. Her book comes out, I want to say, in October, and it is another culinary cozy, but the protagonist has, like, the coolest job I've ever heard of. She's a food anthropologist. And as someone who studied cultural anthropology as a minor, I was like, why didn't I think of this? So it is culinary, but it also comes at it from an academic point of view. It comes from, she actually is married and has a child, which is actually kind of rare in cozy. So it brings, like, a different kind of family element to it that's refreshing. It takes place in a suburb of Miami, so the setting is really vivid. And of course, the food is delicious. So those are my two recommendations.
Those both sound awesome. I'm adding to my TBR. Alex, what do you got for us?
Well, I got into Crime Writers of Color probably the same way the majority of the members did. Kellye invited me and I joined, and I became really active. And I think it's such an important organization, and it's been a game changer. I felt so alone before when I first got into writing, as like, you don't want to feel like the outsider, but now it feels like we really have this partnership of like-minded people that are all working to kind of help diversify our genre, which is so important. I have a few suggestions. I think Kellye's Leica Sister, I read it. We went through our little publishing journey kind of at the same time and traded manuscripts, and we're selling our books around the same time. And I think it's really like a leveling up for her. And her first two books are fantastic, but I think this is going to be the breakout book for Kellye, who I also realize is on the panel with me. Yasmin Ango's.
It's okay. Keep going.
Yeah. I won't stop.
No one cares.
Yasmin Ango's Her Name is Night is a really strong debut. It's like a thriller action suspense novel that I really loved, and I feel partially invested because she was the winner of the Eleanor Taylor Bland Award when I was one of the judges, and it's just really, I don't know, one of my favorite things is just watching people kind of succeed and achieve what they want because they're talented and put in the work, and she's definitely an example of that. What else? I'm also like a huge Megan Abbott stan. Like whatever she writes, I'll read, and the turnout is, I think, her best book, which is amazing because she writes a lot of really good books. So those are my recommendations.
Cool. So we still have 10 minutes for questions. I know that Alex, you got to get out of here right at 4 our time, and
sorry.
No worries. And then I think we're going to take a short break before we head into the librarian stuff. So why don't I just start with these questions that are in the Q&A. So one person asked, Alex, if you write full time, but you still have a day job, correct?
Yes, I do have a day job. I think it's just my own fault. I like to be busy at all times. So, and I like the security of a paycheck and health insurance, and I have 2 small kids, but I try to juggle it all.
Yeah, I think all of you still have a day job, right? So we can't say, when did you decide to give up your day job was the other question, but the day will come, I'm sure. Someone else asked, Kellye, are you contracted for a 2-book series or will they be 2 standalones?
It's going to be 2 standalones. I'm very, 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 very far behind with the second one. I can tell you the idea. I was at a friend's house at a writer's retreat in Baltimore, and she was not there. And she has this beautiful 4-story row house. And like, I was in like the bedroom on like the 3rd floor, and I thought like I could go downstairs and there'd be a dead body and I'd have no clue how it got there. And her neighbors would be like, who's the Black girl? Why did she kill somebody? And so that's the idea for the book that I'm working on that I'm very, 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 very far behind on. So it's a great idea. Hopefully it'll be a great book when I finish it. Hopefully my agent and editor aren't watching this right now.
It will be. I remember when you said that, I remember you tweeted about it and I was like, oh, I cannot wait. That is going to be so good. Luckily, I still have Leica Sister queued up. I've read like the first 3 pages. So
I think the first 3 pages are good. I like my first chapter. I rewrote the first chapter for like 3 years. So I will say that it's a good first chapter.
Yeah, it's good. I just finished These Toxic Things by Rachel Housel Hall.
Oh, yeah,
so good. I've got a ton queued up. And then we have another question that I think this is kind of an interesting one. Does knowing that you are writing for ebook readers ever factor into how you write? Are all folks readers equally, or are ebook versus print readers different?
I mean, I'm both. Sometimes I love my Kindle because I can like read the bathtub. But there's sometimes I just want to have a book in my hands and I want to turn pages and I want to be able to do things. So to me, it's the same. I mean, a reader to me is a reader. So I think of really things like I like to have short paragraphs because I don't want a whole block of text on one page. I think it's hard to read. So I do think about really like silly things like that, but it's not because of ebook readers versus readers. It's just readability for me in general. So to me, they're all this. A reader's a reader. I don't know if other people think differently.
Yeah, same. I mean, I just write for a reader, and they're gonna, the words are getting into their brain, whether it's through an ebook or a print book. It's the same to me. I do think of audio sometimes because I'm a pretty dedicated audiobook listener. So sometimes, I mean, I think it's important for just writing period to read your books aloud, but I think that I pay more attention to that step in the process because of the audiobook aspect.
I should do that because you're right. It's important to kind of know from an audio
It's
standpoint,
blowing up.
Mhm.
especially with like things like knowing who's talking and when to say she said or he said, or sometimes like you
Mhm.
can say it too much and it sounds weird when everything's like she said and then he said, so you definitely, I think I should probably start thinking about that for the book I'm about to finish.
Mhm. And there's a difference between things that like read nicely, but then things that like say like when you speak it out loud, that you'll stumble across if you're like if you're doing a reading, a live reading, or like for your audio, you're just like, oh, like in my head it sounds perfect, but when you say it out loud, it does really sound different. Yeah, no, I'm saying with like to Kellye, where I really like taking advantage of white space. Because I just think of my, anytime, like, I don't know, we've probably all received like an email or a text where it's like this. And I'm like, what am I supposed to look like? What am I supposed to focus on? How do I know, like, where's the information? So I think like breaking it up is just, it's more accessible, I think, honestly. But I don't know if there really is a difference between ebook and like paper or audio. I feel maybe if you're ebook, you're maybe a little bit more like a faster reader because you're just really kind of like getting through it and you're trying to get to the next one. At least it's how it's been with me. I used to be like almost only print book, but I don't know, now during these times, I have like the comfort of just using my phone and just lying in bed while my husband's like sleeping or playing video games and just being able to like read it in the dark, which is a very different feeling of consuming and reading than I think a print. But I don't write differently because of that.
Wanda, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Not really. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said here. And like Kellye, I sometimes like, I think the majority of the time I like a paper book, a book in my hand. So I don't really, I just try to write a good story.
Yeah. We had another question about an audiobook. If your book were an audiobook, which I think, do most of you have audiobooks coming or at least, or some out? Who would you choose to narrate it? Because I know you don't get to decide.
You get to, I mean, my publisher let me choose from
Oh,
like
really?
some options, which I thought was great,
Oh,
and I'm
that's
really
cool.
excited about the person that they're hopefully gonna sign up to do the audiobook. So
Awesome.
I would choose her to do it. So it all worked out.
That's cool.
Oh, Kellye, were you about to speak? I think she's frozen.
Oh, I
I
think
think she
Kellye is
froze.
frozen.
Oh, there we go.
I was like, oh, I think I'm frozen. Let me just shut up. Yeah, so I got audio for my series about like a year ago. And so there's this woman named Bonnie Turpin, who's just like a really well-known audio book narrator. And I didn't think we'd get her, but I was like, oh, what about Bonnie Turpin? Like, let's ask her. They asked her and she said yes, so I was really happy to get her. We're not yet in the process. I'm a little far behind Alex in the process for like a sister, but we definitely put a bunch of names out there. So I'm just, whoever wants to read it, I'm just excited. Just it's going to be an audiobook, period. So.
Yeah, I absolutely love my audiobook. So like I have some auditory processing issues, so I'm not an audio fan. Like I can't really do podcasts much or audiobooks, even though I wish I could. But I was lucky enough to choose from several Filipino American narrators, and Denise Cabanela, it was actually her first audiobook narrator job, and she killed it. So like the minute like I heard like her audition, I was like, this one. And like my husband, who is not a reader, but likes audio, to support me, he's been listening to the audiobook when I'm not around, because it's just weird having my words like being read to me. He was just like, oh my God, this woman is reading the hell out of your book. She is so good. Like she gets like the accents right and the pronunciation and the feeling, and she really gets the character. So I hope I get to keep her forever and ever. She's wonderful.
For me, there's an audiobook coming out, and the narrator is Susan Dalian, who is really, really good. And if I'm not mistaken, she did Alyssa Cole's book, When No One Is Watching. So yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. Well, we are just about out of time, so I want to thank you all and for all of the many emails flying back and forth. It was a true pleasure. I appreciate it so much. I am a huge fan of all of you and admire
Thank
you so
you.
much. So
You're the one who put this together and contacted us. So thank you so much for doing this great panel. It's really all you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
This was really cool.
yeah.
Good to see everybody.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys too.
All right. Well, see
All right,
you
have fun,
guys
guys.
later.
Yeah.
All right, bye,
Bye.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Carrie.
And thanks
Thanks,
to all the
everybody.
Bye,
librarians.
everyone. Bye, bye.
Yes, thank you.
Just reminding all the librarians to stay tuned. We are going to have a discussion in just a few minutes. We can give us a few minutes break between it. Okay, we also wanted to share with you some other book talks for different books that we wanted to highlight and make sure that everybody knew about. And then we're going to discuss some collection issues, collection development, and collection maintenance. Again, please feel free to talk in the chat or to leave questions in the Q&A, and we will be checking it. So once again, I'm going to let Carrie start talking first.
Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the panel. I love those authors. I gush about them. And I'm so glad they were able to be here for all of you. I'm going to talk about a few books by authors of color that I have enjoyed. There are a ton in this presentation, excited to share with you, and some of the other librarians will be sharing too. The Perfect Ruin by Shanora Williams. This was an assignment for me for book list, and it had not been on my radar. So I wanted to share it with you just in case it hadn't been for you. I did see it in Target the other day, so that made me excited. But this book is about Ivy, who is a very enigmatic character who something happened to her and you don't know from the beginning what happened. But you do know that the woman who ruined her life is back in her life, and you don't know how the ruin happened, or the details come as you go. But when Ivy gets kind of infiltrates her social circle, and she's bent on revenge, she's also got a little bit of a moral gray area. So it's a very spiky, edgy thriller, and the Miami setting is just gorgeous. Here in Ohio, it's rainy and cloudy, so I would really love to be on the sun-drenched beach in Miami. We can go to the next slide. The Jigsaw Man, if you have not heard about this book, the totally different kind of a mystery. This is the other. Perfect Ruin is more of a thriller. This is an actual police procedural set in England. We have our Inspector D.I. Henley. She has a lot going on in her backstory. She has a kind of a serial killer nemesis, a lot like Clarice and Hannibal Lecter. He's visiting in jail. She's getting the intel from him based on this copycat killer that's now plaguing the town of London. So it is very violent, but it's so well done and well written. And if you liked Tana French, this is a great read alike for her. You can go ahead to the next one. This one, Fatal Fried Rice, is close to my heart. Vivian Chen is one of my best friends from the Sisters in Crime chapter here in Cleveland, and I've known her since before she even had her first book deal for Death by Dumpling. And she is a wonderful person, and these books are so funny. Cleveland people, for us, it's a little bit of a fun Easter egg because they're set in Fairview Park, Ohio, which is a little suburb on the west side. But even if you're, a Midwestern Chicagoan, you probably also enjoy it. And they're all set in this Asia Village plaza where all of the different shops have all these different murders. And it's so funny. how Lana gets into these scrapes and has to get herself out of them. So I highly recommend this cozy series. It's very similar to Mia Manansala's book, Arsenic and Adobo. Excuse me. Okay, last one for me. Uptown Thief, Aya De Leon. I interviewed Aya on my podcast. So for those of you who don't know, I'm not only a librarian, but I'm also an indie writer. And Aya is also an indie writer. So we had her on, and I had never heard of this series before. And I just absolutely loved this book. It's about an escort service that they're running under the guise of a charity, and they actually are a charity as well. They house women and take care of them when they come off the street and when they're needing help from domestic violence. And it's, again, a different way of exploring justice and the different definitions that justice can have. So there are 4 books in this series, Justice Hustlers, and then she also has a couple of standalones if you'd like to give Aya De Leon a try. She's great. So I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it on to Carrie S.
Hi, everyone. Blacktop Wasteland by S.A. Cosby. I read it over vacation in like 2 days. It was so great. I loved it. It's a heist novel, and I'm pretty unfamiliar with heist novels, but the premise just sounded so great that I had to try it, and I loved it. Beauregard Bug Montague is a former getaway driver gone straight. He owns an auto repair business, but is heavily in debt. Bug agrees to one last job against his better judgment. And because of this last job, his life and the lives of his loved ones are threatened as a result. Does Bug leave the life after this last job, as he has told his wife he would? You'll have to read it and find out. You can suggest this to readers who enjoy other heist novels or heist movies, and the book features strong developed characters and has an interesting suspenseful storyline. Next slide. I couldn't just talk about one of Tracy Clark's books. I've read all 4 in her Chicago Mystery series, so I just decided to talk about them as a whole. Tracy Clark is an author who lives here in the Chicago area. She is a newspaper editor. She is really, really great. Her main character of the series is Cass Raines, a former Chicago cop turned PI. Cass cares very much for her people and is a tenacious badass who doesn't balk at pissing people off. She has a lot of people that love her, but she also has a lot of people who hate her, and that doesn't even matter to her. She doesn't care. She's got a great sarcastic wit. I really love Cass as a character, and I'm excited for more books in the series. The author of Blacktop Wasteland, which I just discussed, has this to say about Tracy Clark. Clark has a unique voice in the PI genre, one that is articulate, daring, and ultimately hopeful. So check out all her books. She's really great.
Okay, I'm going to talk about The Woman in the Purple Skirt by Natsuko Imeemura. So I don't know if you've heard about this book. It's been translated from Japanese by Lucy North, translator. It's a psychological thriller. And what's interesting about it is it has an unreliable narrator, but her unreliableness is to another degree, because you see, we don't really get much of her motivation. We see that she's a woman who is obsessed with another woman. She follows her around, she watches her in the park, she knows where she lives, and eventually, without ever contacting her directly, gets her a job at the narrator's employer. This woman always wears a purple skirt, hence the title. And it's weird because you're really seeing the emotional ups and downs of the narrator. We aren't sure if the narrator loves this woman, if she's envious of this woman, or if she actually resents her. All we know is that she is just obsessed. It's very bizarre. And not until the very end of the book do these two actually have any interaction at all. It takes place in Japan, and this book won the Akutagawa Prize, which is a Japanese literary award presented biannually. It's a quick little read, just about 200 pages, but it has an ambiguous ending, so I think it would be really good for discussion. Next. Okay, Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Sutanto. I'm sure you've heard of this one. It's getting a lot of buzz. It's just hilarious. Okay, we have Madeline Chan, nicknamed Medi. She's a California wedding photographer. She works for her family's business. And her mother and her 3 aunts and her all own like this wedding planning business. So Medi's a photographer. Like one of her aunts is a caterer. One's a cake decorator. One's a, I don't know, seamstress, maybe. You get the idea. So together they run weddings. And these aunties and her mother are very meddlesome. Like I think it's a shame that Medi is still single, and how dare she not have someone in her life to love. And so the mother actually creates an online dating profile for Medi and starts to speak to men on Medi's behalf. It's one of the most hilarious parts of the book is right towards the beginning, when the mother actually is sending eggplant emojis back and forth with strange men, thinking that means that they like to eat good food. So it's really funny. But what happens, of course, is that the mother creates, this blind date situation. Medi agrees to go with on the blind date and then promptly kills her date. On accident, it's out of self-defense, but then she has a dead body. And then she has to go back to her aunties and basically say, help, what do I do with this dead body? They shockingly don't seem that worried or surprised about a dead body. The whole book is just adorable and hilarious. It is actually being adapted for Netflix. So I think, it's going to get a big following as it goes along. Also, I wanted to mention that that these women are actually Chinese Indonesian. And so between them, they have 3 languages spoken: Chinese, Indonesian, and English. So a lot of the hilarity comes from the fact that they don't always understand each other's language. It's just really good, diverse read, and I got a big kick out of it. Next. Okay, Clark and Division by Naomi Hirohara. Aki is our main character. This takes place in 1944. It's around the time of Pearl Harbor's ending. And so we know that a lot of Japanese Americans were being held in internment camps in California. So Aki, our main character, along with her family, are being held in a camp. They are released and they are sent to Chicago, where they are to resettle and sort of start a new life. Aki and her family are very excited to go to Chicago, not just to start a new life, but to see her older sister, Rose, who was actually sent to California a while before the rest of the family. And so they're anxious to be reunited. However, when they get there, they discover that Rose actually died. She died the night before. And the police are calling it a suicide, but Aki knows that there's no way that her sister would have committed suicide, and particularly not the night before they were to be reunited. So we sort of have this novice sleuth situation, right? This is more of a traditional mystery where we're listening to Aki sort of uncover all these details of this crime. I also wanted to mention this because this takes place in Chicago. For those of you who live in Illinois or near the city, there are so many landmarks that are familiar, and sometimes that makes it more of a fun read. Also, the main character works in a library and has librarians as friends. So I know my audience. And then I also wanted to mention that this book is actually based on true crime that terrorized the Japanese American settlers when they came here after Pearl Harbor. So there really is a lot of truth in this historical mystery novel. I think you'll enjoy it. And then we have a bunch of books here that are coming out that I'm not going to fully book talk for you, but I just want to mention either these have all come out, I would say, between like June to November of 2021, all diverse reads and have a crime or mystery or thriller element. Some of these were already mentioned by Mia, actually, but let me just kind of blow through them real quick. The first one, The Shadows of Men by Mukherjee, is book 5 in the Wyndham and Banerjee series. This one is a police procedural, comes out in November. Next one, A Game of Cones by Abby Collette. Mia actually mentioned this author earlier. This one is the second in the Ice Cream Parlor Mystery series. It's a cozy, and you have to love the title. It's adorable. Next, The Secret Keeper of Jaipur is the sequel to The Henna Artist, which was written by Alka Joshi a few years ago. And that one was a Reese's Book Club pick. So this one is pretty big. Velvet Was the Night, you're probably familiar with. That is by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Of course, the same author as Mexican Gothic, which was such a hit recently. This one is sure to be too. This one is actually considered a noir mystery. The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Delilah Harris is a highly anticipated thriller. This one takes place contemporarily. It's a contemporary fiction, Black women's contemporary fiction. Next is Sirens of Memory by Puja Guja. This takes place during the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and that came out in June. Dead Girls by Nikisa Afia. Mia actually mentioned this one earlier. This is the first book in the Harlem Renaissance series, and it is a historical mystery. And then we have A Woman of Intelligence by Karen Tanabe. This is an espionage type of mystery based in post-war New York City. This author is fairly prolific. She writes a lot of historical fiction. Her most recent book was called 100 Suns, which was published in April of 2020. I hope you'll check some of these out and recommend them to patrons. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carrie, who's going to talk about other ways that we can bring diversity into our libraries and make our collections more diverse.
So I have to give a shout out to Abby Collette too, because she is another Cleveland writer, and I read the first one is called A Deadly Inside Scoop, and it is so cute. Also, it will make you want to eat ice cream. So if you're in the mood, I didn't say that earlier about Vivian's books, but they will make you want to eat Asian food also. But that just means that they're the food descriptions are just so good. So really quickly, I want to talk a little bit about author visits. Obviously, we're in a Zoom time, and a visit isn't always possible. A lot of places, though, a lot of authors and bookstores will both do Zoom events. So if you're stuck by COVID, don't despair. You may find that a diverse or an author of color, a diverse group and an author of color will come and speak to your library via Zoom. So check out with your local indie bookstore, see if they've got any tours coming through or if they've got any Zoom tours scheduled. And a lot of times you can get those authors just when they're coming through on book tour and you don't have to pay. They might want to do some kind of co-sponsored event. Lately, my Sisters in Crime group, I'm a member here in Cleveland, and we recently did an outdoor book fair at my library. So it was, plein air outside, didn't have to worry as much about transmission. So that was a fun thing. Of course, with the weather getting not so great, we may not be able to do that, but check with the local Sisters in Crime group. The Chicago chapter is fabulous. Mystery Writers of America, there are a lot of mystery writers there. And of course, as we mentioned, crime writers of color. And then if people come to your library and may mention that they have a book out or that they're working on a book, don't discount that either. I know that there's a lot of stigma about indie authors, but there's a lot of really good stuff out there. You just have to find the right people and the right stuff. So have conversations with those people. And then again, going back to the whole book tour thing, if you see an advanced reader copy on Edelweiss or NetGalley, or even if some of you are still getting printed ARCs, find out if they are looking for a venue to promote. And again, because we're in the era of Zoom, they may not even be local. They may have something they want to do. Diversity reading log. So I came across this article by Michelle T. Leonard when I was researching for this presentation. This is not something that I'd ever come across before, but I found it very interesting. I was thinking about my own reading, and that before I really committed to looking at the diversity of my reading, whether it be with the characters or how the author identifies, I was just reading a lot of books written by white women, which is what I am. So this was a way that I found it's a Google form that the person who wrote the article created, and you can borrow it. It's freely available. And there are different types of diversity that allow you to click the check boxes. So Black, Native American, Asian, Latinx, LGBTQ, different religions, disability. And there's different nuances that you can find those different patterns in what you're reading. And what Leonard says to ask yourselves, first of all, whose voices are amplified in those reading choices and recommendations? Because, who is it that drives you to read? Is it, people who are around you? Is it other librarians? Is it patrons? Is it your friends? Are you reading for pleasure? Are you reading for wanting to grow in your profession? There's just so many different things for you to think about. And the one thing that I was thinking about, this came up in a different article that I read, are single stories. If you look at your chart of your diversity log, does your chart show up, that you read? I read, 20% of all my reading is by Black authors, but are they the same Black authors over and over again? Am I reading? The example that they gave was books about President Obama. We say we have a certain section of the collection that's devoted to African-American stories, but how many of them are about President Obama? So just looking more granularly at your reading and the origins of it. Okay, we can jump to the next slide. I'm actually Karen's going to talk a lot more about diversity audits since she has a lot of experience with them. I personally am just starting to get into this. My library in Ohio has a Collection HQ subscription, and I've just gone through the training for that and pulled out that data. And it's just scratching the surface on how you can build an inclusive collection, but it is a nice way to start and kind of get a bird's eye view. The Counting the Collection article that's in Library Journal was it wasn't crime fiction, but it was I think it was adult biographies, but it also touches on that single stories. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have for that. So Karen has a lot more to say.
Okay, so I want to share with everybody some tales and tips from doing a diversity audit. First is just to remember that audit actually means to measure, because if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So expect any audit you do to have lots of counting. The first thing you want to do is define what your goals are, and I found it helps to keep it simple and concise. I'm not going to go into a lot of details here. Like I said, I'm more going to give you the caveats of what we learned. So we did our first collection audit in 2017. And we were given our goals. We had about 6 months to do it. And we debated how to do it and what to include for almost 4 months, which means that we actually didn't have time to finish the audit. We also lost some staff, had to reform the team. So we restarted, we got an extension, simplified our goals. And the main reason I'm sharing this is because you really need to realize that when it comes to diversity audits, the perfect is definitely the enemy of the good. So for your first audit, even if your goal is just as simple as to increase staff awareness and to set a benchmark to compare everything else to, that's a good goal. Just get it done. So we got restarted. We did all of our data collection in 1.5 months. We analyzed our data and made recommendations in another month. So we spent a lot longer debating what we were going to do than it actually took to do it. So when we finished that, we actually had a benchmark. And then in 2021, we started our next diversity audit. And Shoshana Frank, I saw her in the chat. She's actually been leading the second diversity audit here. We knew what we were doing better. We had learned from doing the first one. So we were able to expand it and include nonfiction areas and also expand the facets that we analyzed. So if you're intimidated by how to start a diversity audit, again, just do it and you will definitely learn from doing it. If you are looking at your entire collection and overwhelmed by the size, remember mathematical sampling. It is your friend. Take a sample of the collection and move forward from there. Also, just be honest with yourself. Start off assuming that you're not going to do as well as you think you are doing. And remember that there are factors outside your control. So we cannot control the publishing industry. However, we can influence what is published. And remember, it's not just what we buy, it's also what we keep and what we promote. But I'm going to discuss that more in a bit. So after you've done your diversity audit, what are you going to do with it next? This has been the talk at ALA, ILA. Willywig is Innovatives Library Conference for those of you who have Sierra or Polaris. Rails and CCS and SWAN are all groups in the Chicago area if you happen to be on from Ohio. But all of these groups have been discussing what to do. So after you've got your information, a lot of people have been talking about how to add the access points into your catalog. And I'm going to tell you right now, my background is in Reader's Advisory and Collection Development. I got these mark fields from our cataloger. So realize that when you get a collection audit, most people start immediately talking about, let's putting this in our subject headings. But the normal subject headings that everybody thinks of are actually about the contents of the books, not the authors. So these are actually the headings that I curate and Collection HQ are using. So they are analyzing more what your collection is about than by who is presenting the content and within who are the authors of that content. But they're still useful and valuable to look at your subject headings. So are you providing multiple points of access? And are you using modern language that our community is using when they're searching? A good example of that would be the Library of Congress subject heading is Hispanic, but a lot of people may be searching by Latina, Latino, or even Latinx. If somebody enters those into your catalog, are they going to find anything? Have you cross-linked those so that people can enter what they are used to reading in the newspapers and actually find those books? You also will hear a lot about Library of Congress subject headings. And I will state publicly that in my not so humble opinion, no, we don't need to wait for Library of Congress to change their subject headings. The one that everybody goes to when discussing this is illegal aliens. But I will say that we do need to have it so that our catalogs can cross-link to each other. Now, I'm fortunate that I work at a standalone library, which makes it a little easier for us to control our own subject headings. But at the same time, our customers use a shared catalog with the other Lincoln libraries. And we need to have it so that people can follow subject headings in our books to materials in other people's books, in other libraries' books. So we do need to share what kind of subject headings we're using. That's why Rails CCS and SWAN are talking about what are we going to use as subject headings. Also realize that at some point, Library of Congress will start changing their subject headings, but even then they are never going to have the preferred term, because the preferred term that everybody sees in the news is always going to change much faster. So whenever you change one of these headings or make a new access point, you need to also have a plan so that you can continue updating it as you go. So you want to add information about the authors to your catalog. That's great. And the way we usually do it is with local subject headings. But before you start going through and marking all the books as these are all books by Black authors, stop and think about, are you actually being inclusive or are you othering authors? So what I'm saying is, if you're marking all the books by Black authors, are you also marking all the books that are by white authors? Are you going through and saying these books are white, these books are by male authors if you're marking all the females? Are you saying these books are by cis and hetero authors if you're marking all the LGBT books? Basically, if you want to be inclusive, you have to apply the same rule to everybody. You don't want to other people while you're trying to promote them. And again, what are your goals for creating the subject headings that access your that give access points to what information about the authors? If your main goal is to use it for the staff to use it for weeding and displays, you can use a mark field that won't actually display to the public. And because it's not displaying to the public, you can use any text you want. It doesn't need to be modern language. It can be a tag with initials that maybe not everybody understands. The 386 field is actually designated to be characteristics of the authors, creators, and contributors. If you do want to display it in your catalog, then you usually want to use local subject headings. But again, don't use jargon and don't use what may be the in term right now. So a year ago, everybody who did this would have gone through and put own voices. Now we know that a lot of people don't like the term own voices. So again, when you add these, have a plan to change them as we learn more. Also realize that if your library uses one of these services, the two biggest ones I know are Backstage Library Works and Marchive. They go through and have computers that help verify all your cataloging records. Before you start making changes, talk to them. I realize many of you are in adult services, but I want you to realize that your cataloging staff needs to do a lot of things behind the scenes. So next, I want to cover basically some reasons why people I've heard do not want to add books by non-A-list authors, or if you want to call them diverse authors, to your collection. One of the most frequent ones I hear is, but my community doesn't read books by that type of author, books in that type of genre. So we all know that it's very hard to find things in our stacks. So my question for you is, are you actually featuring authors and books by different types of authors in your displays? Are you featuring them in your book lists? You don't want to make a display that's titled diverse titles or diverse authors. To paraphrase Kellye earlier, you don't want to have diversity displays, you want to have diverse displays. Again, focus on the appeal factors of these books. Every book we're giving you today is a crime novel. Focus on the fact that it's a crime novel. And then focus on the fact that some of them are police procedurals, some of them are noir, some of them are cozy. Focus on those instead of focusing in on what makes the book different from what they may be used to reading. My personal pet peeve, please do not label all of these books as literary crime, because you may think that labeling something that's other people may call diverse crime as literary crime is giving it a compliment. It's actually not a compliment. There are some genre readers like myself who will intentionally avoid anything that's tagged literary crime because we don't like literary fiction. If we don't want an ambiguous ending, if we don't want some of the other characteristics of literary fiction, then we're going to intentionally avoid anything you tag as literary crime. So again, focus on the appeal of the book and the way it was written. Realize that you don't need in your displays or your book lists or in anything really to give discovery points to all those big name authors. People on the bestsellers list don't need your help finding discovery. Instead, use those authors as entry points to highlight diverse books. Say books for somebody who likes another author. So if you like Paula Hawkins, then you will like these books. Take your best-selling authors and your A-list crime writers and use them as the entry point instead of as the result. Everybody knows that the books you hand sell go out the best. So that diversity, that audit of your own reading habits is a great way to start. You need to educate yourself about how you're slanting your own worldview. And then after you've taken yourself in hand and started learning about books from cultures that you may have excluded previously, then share those with your coworkers and educate your coworkers. The more people who are hand selling these books, the more they will go out and your community will read them. Again, are you making shelf talkers for these books? Are you picking them for your book clubs? If you aren't really making an effort to get these books into people's hands, then you can't say your community doesn't read them. What you're really saying is that your community can't find them. And if your community can't find them, that's really on you. My next favorite reason is we just don't have enough space. Yeah, actually, you probably do. How many copies of Patterson do you have on the shelf? How many copies of last year's bestseller do you have on the shelf? Those books are not going to show up on your zero circ reports when you weed. If you have multiple copies, it's very likely each copy will go out exactly once. So then it won't show up on your data-driven reports. I've heard lots of people saying hoarding is not collection development. It's also true that holds ratios are not collection development. We buy multiple copies of those bestsellers and those best-selling authors to fill an immediate demand. You don't need to keep them all once that immediate demand has passed. This photograph is actually from a newspaper article of a library that said they did not have space to diversify their collection, but they had plenty of space. They just had lots of copies of really big name authors and big name titles. So go to your shelves, set a maximum number of copies that you're going to let a book have. And I've included the math on how you can figure that out. If you don't understand it, email me. Again, look at how many copies you have of a book, figure out the total cumulative circulations, and then back calculate how many copies you actually need based on what percentage chance you want for people to find it. I've also heard that there aren't any books by authors that aren't white male, especially in crime, that have the appeal characteristics that somebody wants. I will grant you that crime is often dominated by white men. However, we are part of the reason why those authors dominate crime fiction. So I'm going to tell you that you are a librarian and you can research to find books that are outside of that area. Read through the slides that we've made today and listen to the discussion. You'll find an awful lot of authors and titles have been included. And as Kellye said earlier, there are 300 authors in the Crime Writers of Color group now. So go there and find them. Also, weed smart and combine that with your merchandising. So for example, weed your collection enough that on all the shelves that are at eye level, you can put something face out at the end of that row. Those books that are face out will fly off the shelf, and use those to promote books that you say the community is not reading, and you will find they do start reading them. Remember that especially for crime fans, series really matter. So if you get a request for the second book in the series, go double check that you have the first. If you don't have the first, buy the first. It may be that whoever's requesting the second personally bought the first, but the next person who comes along will not read the second without having read the first. Also remember, anytime a new book comes out by an author, go check and see if you have their backlist if they write standalones. Libraries are excellent at finding or providing backlists, but when you buy the backlist, you also have to sell it. You have to hand sell it. You have to put it on the displays. You have to get it in front of people's faces. And again, don't forget formats. If you have the print book, did you buy it as an ebook? Did you buy it as an audiobook? Make sure you've given them as many points of access as possible. When you're on social media, who do you follow? Audit who you follow as well. And when you're looking at popular culture, what resources are you using? Realize that you are defining the scope of your world. If you can't find the books, it's probably because you are looking at the same sources all the time, and you need to diversify your own resources and you need to look outside them. So next, I'm going to turn it back to Carrie for a little bit.
I love all those points, Karen. Those are just such great things to remember and think about. So just to highlight a couple of resources that you've probably heard me, if you've heard me talk or follow my Twitter or anything like that, you're probably sick of all of these things. But if you have not heard of them, they're very helpful. Sisters in Crime is where I met all these wonderful mystery authors. It's how I got connected with ARRT and Becky and all of the lovely team that we've been working on this presentation. So it's definitely a great resource. As I already mentioned, the Chicago chapter. There is a great librarian list now. So I was at one time the Sisters in Crime library liaison. The new liaison, Sherry Randall, who is also a mystery author, she has done such a great job kind of swooping in during COVID and creating this monthly email that we have now. So if you get on this list, you'll get a little article from a Sisters in Crime writer. And then after the article, there'll be a little spreadsheet with all of the new releases. And Sisters in Crime is very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they have a wonderful list of DEI resources, mostly meant for writers, but is also a great resource for librarians too. And Frankie's list, they actually started that when I was on the board. So Frankie Bailey was a past president of Sisters in Crime. They are called goddesses. So if you ever hear them referred to as goddesses, that is why. And Frankie's a fantastic writer too, if you want to check out her books. And she was the first one to collect authors with different diverse backgrounds and put them into a list. So Sisters in Crime is constantly adding to that list, and they just recently put together the DEI page. So definitely check that out. We did talk about Crime Writers of Color at length. They are a fabulous organization. I have to say, like, I don't have an official title helping them out. Like they were saying, it's not really an official organization. I've been working with MJ Sony, who does not have a book out yet, but I am chomping at the bit for when a book comes out with her, because her book sounds so cool. It's about an Indian doctor who gets caught up in a crime. And so I've been helping MJ because she's not a librarian and they don't have many librarians among their ranks. So we would love for different librarians of color and all other librarians to join the mailing list, and library workers as well. And check out their speaker directory too. As Karen mentioned, they're a great place to start. Don't give your community that excuse, well, my community doesn't read this. Well, if you're not putting authors of color in front of your community, then they don't know that they exist. So you want to get those authors in front of everyone. There were so many great books talked about today. So I would love for you all to check those out. And then where are we? These are Karen's.
Yeah, I just wanted to go over a few other resources if you want to data mine. This first list, or the first row with crime reads, murder and mayhem and mystery scene, are all basically fan generated sites and publications. The second line are all different writers associations and awards. So all of these are also good sources to find more content. And then these Book Riot, We Need Diverse Books, different author groups and promotion sites based on ethnicity and gender diversity. RA for All is also a favorite. And then these last two, Rich in Color and Melanin in YA, are both for teen books. All of these periodically run lists of books for crime. None of these are specifically directed at crime, but you will be able to find good things there if you follow them. And then here is all of our contact information, and we can open it up for questions if anybody wants to jump on and ask us something. I so miss seeing everybody's face. I do not know how many people are typing or waiting. Laura James wants to recommend The Firekeeper. I'm sorry, The Firekeeper's Daughter. Yeah, if you have a great book that you didn't see on the slides, feel free to add it as well, and I will shout it out. I'll also mention the next art program is going to feature romance. And again, we're going to try to promote a lot of diverse authors. We're picking basically romance and crime because those are two of the most popular genres. Yes, we will be posting a link both to the recording and to the slides. And then a few people asked me if they could have information about our audit. I've done some presentations on it, which I believe I have a recording of, which I can share with you, but I can also share the audit information from 2017. I am now the collection services manager, which means I'm more in charge of all that access points in the catalog, but I can reach out to Shoshana Frank and Nicole Lawton, who headed up the 2021 diversity audit. They don't have their final report done yet, but they could give you information as well. We have a recommendation for Midnight Hour, a chilling anthology of crime fiction from 20 acclaimed authors of color. It's great so far, by Tanisha Allen. Susan Schaefer says Wild Women and the Blues by Denny Bryce. It's set in Chicago, in Bronzeville. Erin, let me type that is the art website is artreads.org. The romance program will be in conjunction with Rails again. We're doing all of our programs through COVID, hopefully, with Joe. He's been kind enough to help us host those. Yeah, Jennifer says there's not a date yet. We'll be getting that to you soon, though, for when the romance program is. All of our programs are open right now to anybody. You do not have to be a member of ART. You can be in any country. You can definitely be from Ohio. That's not really a different country, but it's different than Illinois. Yeah, ART, we've been doing such a good job with all of these open programs that we're talking about trying to spread our reach outside of Illinois. Okay, if nobody has any questions, I'll let you go 5 minutes early. Everybody can go take a break before I return you to your normally scheduled day. Jessica, Carrie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just thanks everybody for being here, and yeah, it's fun to be with all of you, even if it has to be virtual.
I hope you got some useful information.
And thank you for being open to recommending diverse reads. It's so important.
I'm gonna jet off. I have children to pick up from daycare. I will see you all later.
Bye, Carrie.
Bye.